On October 22, 2023, 43-year-old David Kellerman, a former military intelligence officer turned private investigator, stumbled upon what would become the most controversial piece of evidence in cryptozoology history. What started as a routine surveillance job in the remote forests of Northern California would lead to the discovery of footage so compelling and disturbing that government agencies would spend months trying to suppress its release. David Kellerman had built his reputation on finding things that others couldn't or wouldn't. After 15 years in military intelligence, specializing in reconnaissance and surveillance operations, he had transitioned to private investigation work that often took him to places most people would never dare to venture. During his service, David had developed skills that few civilians possessed. He could move through any terrain without leaving traces, set up surveillance equipment that would remain undetected for months, and analyze behavioral patterns with an accuracy that had made him legendary among his peers. The case that brought David to the Humboldt County wilderness seemed straightforward enough. Margaret Thornfield, an elderly widow from San Francisco, had hired him to investigate the disappearance of her grandson, 22-year-old Timothy Thornfield, who had vanished during a solo camping trip 6 months earlier. The official search had been called off after 3 weeks, with authorities concluding that Timothy had likely fallen victim to harsh wilderness conditions. But Margaret wasn't satisfied with the official explanation. Timothy had been an experienced outdoorsman and Eagle Scout who knew the forests of Northern California better than most park rangers. She was convinced that something else had happened to her grandson. The official investigation had been thorough, but ultimately fruitless. Search and rescue teams had combed hundreds of square miles of forest using helicopters, tracking dogs, and thermal imaging equipment. They had found Timothy's abandoned campsite relatively quickly, but the scene had raised more questions than answers. His tent was still standing, his food supplies were untouched, and his expensive camera equipment was scattered around the site as if he had left in a hurry. David's investigation had led him deep into the Six Rivers National Forest, following Timothy's planned route through some of the most remote terrain in California. His methodical approach had already uncovered several clues that suggested Timothy's disappearance was far from ordinary. Strange footprints around the abandoned campsite, unusual hair samples caught on tree branches, and several damaged trees that showed signs of being deliberately broken. The footprints were unlike anything David had encountered. They measured approximately 16 inches in length and 8 inches in width, with a depth that suggested something weighing at least 400 pounds. The stride pattern indicated bipedal movement, but the gait was different from human locomotion. It was on his 4th day in the forest that David made the discovery that would change everything. While investigating a remote valley about 2 miles from Timothy's last known location, David's motion-activated trail cameras had captured something extraordinary during the previous night. The footage showed a massive, bipedal creature moving through the forest with purposeful intelligence, carrying what appeared to be human belongings. David's military training had taught him to remain calm under pressure, but reviewing the footage on his camera's LCD screen made his hands shake with excitement and disbelief. The creature was unlike anything he had seen in his years of wilderness operations around the world. Standing at least 8 feet tall and covered in dark, coarse hair, it moved with a fluid grace that seemed impossible for something so large. The creature's movement patterns were particularly fascinating to David's trained eye. It demonstrated an understanding of forest navigation that surpassed even the most experienced human woodsman. The being moved along natural corridors through the dense vegetation, avoiding areas where its passage would leave obvious signs, and seemed to understand how to use terrain features to remain concealed from potential observers. More disturbing was what the creature was carrying. David could clearly make out a backpack, camping gear, and what looked like camera equipment, items that matched the description of Timothy Thornfield's missing belongings. The implications were staggering. Not only had David potentially captured the first clear footage of a Bigfoot, but the creature appeared to be connected to Timothy's disappearance. David's investigation took on new urgency, as he realized he might be dealing with something far more significant than a simple missing person case. He began setting up additional cameras throughout the valley, creating a surveillance network that would monitor the creature's movements and hopefully lead him to answers about Timothy's fate. The surveillance network David established was based on techniques he had learned during counterinsurgency operations in Afghanistan. He positioned cameras at natural choke points where any large creature would be forced to pass, used camouflaged solar panels to ensure continuous power, and established overlapping fields of view that would make it impossible for anything to move through the area undetected. The breakthrough came on his 6th night in the forest. David's cameras captured not just one creature, but an entire family group, adults and what appeared to be juveniles, moving through the valley in a coordinated pattern. The footage revealed behavior that was unmistakably intelligent. The creatures communicated through complex vocalizations, used tools to manipulate their environment, and demonstrated problem-solving abilities that challenged everything science thought it knew about unknown primates. The family group consisted of what appeared to be 2 adult males, 3 adult females, and 4 juveniles of varying ages. Their social interactions were remarkably sophisticated, with clear hierarchies and role assignments. The larger male seemed to serve as a scout, moving ahead of the group to assess potential threats or obstacles. The females appeared to be responsible for the care and education of the juveniles, while the second male brought up the rear, ensuring the group's security. Most remarkably, the cameras captured the creatures interacting with human artifacts in ways that suggested they understood their purpose and origin. They examined Timothy's camping equipment with obvious curiosity, handled his camera gear with surprising gentleness, and even appeared to be attempting to operate some of the electronic devices. David realized he was documenting something unprecedented. Not just evidence of Bigfoot's existence, but proof that these creatures possessed intelligence and curiosity about human technology. The footage showed them living in sophisticated shelters constructed from natural materials, using primitive tools, and maintaining what appeared to be a complex social structure. The shelters were particularly impressive, demonstrating engineering principles that rivaled human construction techniques. The creatures had woven branches and vegetation into waterproof structures that provided protection from the elements while remaining virtually invisible to casual observation. The interiors were organized with designated areas for sleeping, food storage, and what appeared to be tool-making activities. But the most shocking discovery came when David's cameras captured footage of Timothy Thornfield himself, alive, apparently unharmed, and living among the creatures. The young man appeared to have been adopted into their group, participating in their daily activities and showing no signs of distress or captivity. The footage suggested that rather than being a victim, Timothy had become an observer and perhaps even a student of these remarkable beings. The implications of this discovery were staggering. Timothy appeared to have been living with the creatures for months, learning their behaviors and possibly even their communication methods. In several clips, David observed Timothy participating in what appeared to be teaching sessions where the adult creatures demonstrated various survival techniques and forest navigation skills. The young man seemed to have adapted remarkably well to his new environment, showing none of the psychological trauma typically associated with prolonged captivity or isolation. Timothy's integration into the group was so complete that he had begun to adopt some of their behavioral patterns. He moved through the forest with the same silent grace as his adoptive family, communicated through a combination of gestures and vocalizations that the creatures seemed to understand, and participated in their daily routines of foraging, shelter maintenance, and group activities. David's analysis of the footage revealed even more disturbing details. The creatures appeared to have a sophisticated understanding of human technology and behavior. They had carefully preserved Timothy's electronic equipment, keeping it dry and protected in what appeared to be a specially constructed shelter. More remarkably, they seemed to understand the purpose of the cameras and recording devices, occasionally positioning them to capture specific activities or interactions. The social dynamics within the creature group were complex and fascinating. David observed clear hierarchies, with older individuals teaching younger ones and specific roles assigned to different members of the community. They demonstrated advanced problem-solving abilities, working together to construct elaborate shelters, create tools from natural materials, and even develop what appeared to be a primitive form of agriculture, cultivating certain plants and fungi in designated areas of their territory. The creatures' tool use was particularly sophisticated. They fashioned implements from stone, wood, and bone that served specific purposes: digging tools for extracting roots and tubers, cutting implements for processing plant materials, and even what appeared to be primitive weapons for hunting small game. The tools showed evidence of careful craftsmanship and were maintained and improved over time. David's military instincts told him that this discovery was too significant to handle alone. The footage he had captured would revolutionize our understanding of human evolution, primate intelligence, and the hidden ecosystems that still existed in North America's most remote wilderness areas. But he also understood that such evidence would attract attention from government agencies that might not have the public's best interests at heart. His concerns proved justified when David returned to civilization and attempted to contact Timothy's grandmother with news of his discovery. Within hours of uploading the footage to a secure server, David found himself under surveillance by unmarked vehicles and receiving visits from individuals who claimed to represent various federal agencies but carried credentials that didn't quite check out. The first visit came at 6:30 a.m., just 2 days after David had returned from the forest. 3 individuals in dark suits appeared at his office, claiming to represent a joint task force investigating unusual wildlife activity in national forests. Their leader, who identified himself only as Agent Morrison, was polite but firm in his questioning about David's activities in the 6 Rivers National Forest. The visitors were professional and polite, but their message was clear. David had stumbled upon something that was considered a matter of national security. They explained that the existence of these creatures had been known to certain government agencies for decades, and that a careful protocol had been established to manage any interactions or discoveries. David's footage, they claimed, could disrupt delicate research programs and potentially endanger both the creatures and any humans who might encounter them. Agent Morrison revealed that the government had been aware of these creature populations since the 1960s. When military personnel conducting training exercises in remote wilderness areas began reporting encounters with unknown bipedal primates. Initial investigations had been conducted under the auspices of various classified programs, with findings that were deemed too sensitive for public release. The pressure to surrender his evidence intensified rapidly. David received offers to purchase his footage for substantial sums, followed by increasingly aggressive demands that he turn over all materials related to his investigation. When he refused, the harassment escalated to include break-ins at his office, tampering with his vehicle, and threats against his personal safety. The offers were substantial, initially starting at $500,000 for all footage and related materials, then escalating to over $2 million when David continued to refuse. The money was offered through intermediaries who claimed to represent private research foundations, but David's intelligence background allowed him to recognize the hallmarks of government-front organizations. David realized he was caught in a situation that went far beyond a simple missing person case. The government's reaction to his discovery suggested that authorities were already aware of these creatures' existence and were actively working to suppress any evidence that might reach the public. The implications were staggering. If Bigfoot was real and the government knew about it, how many other secrets were being kept from the American people? The harassment campaign against David was sophisticated and relentless. His phone calls were monitored, his internet activity was tracked, and his financial accounts were subjected to mysterious audits and freezes. Former military colleagues who had maintained contact with him suddenly became unavailable, and his professional network began to distance themselves from his work. The message was clear: cooperate with the suppression effort or face complete professional and personal destruction. David's bank accounts were frozen under the pretense of a tax investigation. His professional licenses were challenged by regulatory agencies, citing anonymous complaints. And his landlord received visits from individuals claiming to be conducting background checks for security clearances. The psychological pressure was intense and unrelenting, designed to isolate him from support systems and make resistance seem futile. But David's military training had prepared him for psychological warfare, and he refused to be intimidated. Instead, he began documenting the harassment he was experiencing, creating a parallel record of government suppression that was almost as compelling as his original Bigfoot footage. The pattern of intimidation and cover-up suggested that these creatures represented something far more significant than just an unknown species. They were evidence of a hidden world that powerful interests were determined to keep secret. Using skills learned during his military career, David began taking precautions to protect both himself and his evidence. He created multiple copies of his footage, stored them in secure locations, and established protocols for their release if anything happened to him. He also reached out to trusted contacts in the scientific community, sharing his findings with researchers who had the expertise to understand their significance. David's security protocols were based on techniques used to protect classified intelligence in hostile environments. He established dead drops in multiple locations, created encrypted digital copies stored on secure servers in different countries, and developed a network of trusted individuals who would release the information if he disappeared or was incapacitated. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a primatologist at UC Berkeley who had been quietly studying Bigfoot reports for over a decade, was among the first scientists to review David's footage. Her analysis confirmed what David had suspected. The creatures displayed behavioral patterns and physical characteristics that were consistent with a highly intelligent primate species that had somehow remained hidden from mainstream science. Dr. Rodriguez had been conducting her research in secret, knowing that open investigation of Bigfoot phenomena would destroy her academic career. She had accumulated a database of over 3,000 reported encounters, analyzed hundreds of footprint casts, and even collected hair and tissue samples that defied classification. David's footage provided the visual confirmation she had been seeking for years. The genetic analysis of hair samples that David had collected provided even more compelling evidence. The DNA showed characteristics that were clearly primate, but didn't match any known species in scientific databases. Most intriguingly, the genetic markers suggested a lineage that had diverged from human ancestors much more recently than previously thought possible. The DNA analysis revealed a genetic profile that was approximately 96% similar to modern humans, closer than chimpanzees or any other known primate species. The remaining 4% showed unique characteristics that suggested adaptation to specific environmental conditions and possibly enhanced physical capabilities. The genetic evidence supported the theory that these creatures represented a surviving branch of the human family tree. Dr. Rodriguez's preliminary findings indicated that these creatures might represent a surviving population of an archaic hominid species, possibly related to Homo erectus or an unknown branch of the human family tree. The implications for our understanding of human evolution were profound. If these beings had survived in North America for thousands of years, it would completely rewrite the story of human migration and development. The scientific analysis also revealed disturbing evidence of government knowledge and involvement. Several of the hair samples contained traces of synthetic compounds that suggested the creatures had been exposed to human-made chemicals, possibly through deliberate feeding or medical treatment. This evidence supported David's growing suspicion that government agencies had been studying and possibly managing these populations for decades. Chemical analysis revealed the presence of compounds used in veterinary tranquilizers, suggesting that the creatures had been captured and studied at some point. There were also traces of synthetic vitamins and minerals that indicated supplemental feeding programs. The evidence painted a picture of long-term government monitoring and management of these populations. As word of David's discovery began to spread through underground networks of researchers and cryptozoology enthusiasts, the pressure from government agencies intensified. David found himself the target of a sophisticated disinformation campaign designed to discredit his findings and destroy his reputation. False stories about his military service appeared online, his professional licenses were challenged by regulatory agencies, and former clients were contacted and pressured to file complaints against him. The disinformation campaign was remarkably thorough and well coordinated. Fake social media accounts began spreading rumors about David's mental health and professional competence. Doctored documents appeared online, suggesting he had been discharged from the military under questionable circumstances. Even his family members were contacted by individuals claiming to be journalists or researchers, asking leading questions designed to elicit statements that could be used to undermine his credibility. Professional trolls flooded online forums with posts questioning David's military record, his investigative methods, and his mental stability. Fake reviews appeared on professional rating sites, describing fictional negative experiences with his services. The campaign was so sophisticated that it clearly required significant resources and coordination, further confirming David's suspicions about government involvement. The situation reached a crisis point when David received credible intelligence that a raid on his secure storage facilities was being planned. Realizing that his evidence was in immediate danger, he made the decision to release everything to the public through multiple channels simultaneously. The footage was uploaded to dozens of video platforms, sent to news organizations around the world, and distributed through encrypted networks that would make it impossible to suppress completely. David's release strategy was carefully planned and executed with military precision. He coordinated the simultaneous release across multiple time zones, ensuring that the footage would be available on dozens of platforms before authorities could react. He also included detailed documentation of the harassment campaign against him, creating a narrative that explained why the evidence was being suppressed. The public release of David's footage created an immediate sensation. Within hours, the videos had been viewed millions of times and were being analyzed by experts around the world. The quality and consistency of the evidence made it impossible to dismiss as a hoax, and the documentation of government suppression efforts added credibility to claims that authorities had been hiding the truth about Bigfoot for decades. The initial response was overwhelming. Major news networks picked up the story within hours, and social media platforms were flooded with discussions, analyses, and debates about the footage. The hashtag Bigfoot Revealed began trending worldwide, and the videos were shared millions of times across all platforms. The scientific community's response was divided but intense. Mainstream researchers who had previously dismissed Bigfoot as pseudoscience were forced to confront evidence that met rigorous standards of documentation and analysis. The footage showed anatomical details, behavioral patterns, and environmental interactions that would be nearly impossible to fabricate convincingly. Leading primatologists from around the world began requesting access to the raw footage for analysis. Dr. Jane Goodall, the renowned chimpanzee researcher, issued a statement calling for serious scientific investigation of the evidence. The International Union for Conservation of Nature announced the formation of a special committee to evaluate the footage and its implications for primate taxonomy. Most compelling was the documentation of Timothy Thornfield's apparent integration into the creature's social group. Anthropologists noted that his behavior in the footage suggested he had learned to communicate with the beings and had been accepted as a member of their community. The implications for our understanding of interspecies communication and intelligence were profound. The international response to David's revelations was swift and varied. European scientists, less constrained by American government pressure, began organizing expeditions to search for similar creatures in their own wilderness areas. Indigenous communities around the world came forward with their own stories and evidence of encounters with similar beings, suggesting that these creatures might represent a global phenomenon rather than a uniquely North American mystery. The Smithsonian Institution announced plans for a comprehensive analysis of the footage, while the National Geographic Society committed funding for follow-up expeditions to the area where David had made his discoveries. International research teams from Japan, Germany, and the United Kingdom requested permission to conduct their own investigations in American wilderness areas. The government's response to the footage's release was swift and predictable. Official statements dismissed the evidence as elaborate hoaxes, while behind the scenes, agencies worked to discredit David and suppress further investigation. The area where he had made his discoveries was suddenly declared off-limits due to environmental concerns, and researchers who attempted to verify his findings were turned away by armed guards. The Forest Service issued emergency closure orders for large sections of the Six Rivers National Forest, citing concerns about endangered species habitat and fire danger. Military personnel were deployed to enforce the closures, and aircraft were prohibited from flying over the restricted areas. The response was so disproportionate that it only served to validate David's claims about government cover-up efforts. But the damage to the cover-up had already been done. David's footage had provided the world with undeniable evidence that intelligent bipedal creatures were living in North America's wilderness areas, and that government agencies had been aware of their existence for years. The revelation sparked a global conversation about what other secrets might be hidden from public view, and whether citizens had the right to know about discoveries that could fundamentally change our understanding of life on Earth. Timothy Thornfield's fate remained a mystery, as attempts to return to the area where he had been filmed were blocked by federal authorities. His grandmother, Margaret, filed lawsuits demanding access to her grandson and answers about his condition, but legal proceedings were stalled by claims of national security and public safety concerns. The legal battle that followed revealed the extent of government knowledge about these creatures. Court documents, heavily redacted but still revealing, showed that multiple agencies had been aware of Bigfoot populations for decades. Research programs funded through black budgets and classified operations had been studying the creature's behavior, intelligence, and potential impact on human society. Margaret Thornfield's legal team, led by prominent civil rights attorney Sarah Chen, filed Freedom of Information Act requests that uncovered decades of classified documents related to anomalous primate encounters in national forests. The documents revealed a systematic program of evidence suppression and witness intimidation that had been ongoing since the 1960s. The classified documents revealed the existence of a joint military-civilian research program codenamed Project Wildman that had been studying these creatures for over 50 years. The program had documented hundreds of encounters, collected extensive biological samples, and even attempted limited communication with the beings. The research had been classified at the highest levels due to concerns about public panic and the potential impact on religious and scientific worldviews. David's life was forever changed by his discovery and the events that followed. He became a reluctant celebrity in the cryptozoology community while remaining a target of government harassment and surveillance. His private investigation business was destroyed by the controversy, but he found new purpose as an advocate for government transparency and the public's right to know about scientific discoveries. The harassment continued even after the footage's release, with David facing ongoing legal challenges, financial difficulties, and personal threats. However, he also received support from unexpected quarters, including former government officials who came forward to confirm the existence of classified programs studying these creatures. The footage that David captured in the forests of Northern California remains some of the most compelling evidence for Bigfoot's existence ever recorded. More importantly, it has opened a window into a hidden world that exists parallel to our own, challenging our assumptions about intelligence, consciousness, and humanity's place in the natural order. The creatures that David documented continue to live in the remote wilderness areas of the Pacific Northwest, protected now not just by their own intelligence and stealth, but by government agencies that seem determined to keep their existence secret. The reasons for this secrecy remain unclear, but the implications are profound. If such remarkable beings can remain hidden in our modern world, what other wonders and mysteries await discovery in the wild places that still exist beyond the reach of civilization? David's story serves as a reminder that truth has a way of emerging despite the best efforts of those who would suppress it. His courage in releasing footage that powerful interests wanted to keep hidden has given the world a glimpse of possibilities that challenge our most basic assumptions about what we think we know. Sometimes the most important discoveries are the ones that certain people never want us to see.